In a small quiet town, Sarah and James lived a life that many envied. They met in college, their connection instant, two souls who seemed to fit together perfectly. Their wedding was a beautiful affair, filled with laughter, promises, and dreams of a future spent hand in hand. But as the years passed, the magic between them began to fade, slowly at first, then with a harsh clarity. It was a Sunday morning when Sarah realized things had changed for good. The sun was just beginning to filter through the curtains of their bedroom, and James was sitting on the edge of the bed, his face buried in his phone. The silence in the room felt suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of unsaid words. "James," she said quietly, her voice trembling, "do you still love me?" He looked up, his eyes tired, as if he had been expecting this question for a long time but had no answer ready. He sighed deeply, setting his phone down beside him, and met her gaze. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know anymore." The words hit her like a slap, sharp and unyielding. They had grown apart in a way that no amount of time or effort could mend. They had tried everything, therapy, date nights, long conversations, but the distance between them had only grown wider. Sarah could feel the tears welling up, but she refused to let them fall. She had spent too many years trying to hold things together, too many years convincing herself that love could be enough to overcome the cracks. But it wasn't. She stood up, her legs shaky beneath her, as if the weight of the decision she was about to make had suddenly become too much to bear. "I think it's time we face the truth. We're not the same people we were when we met. We've changed, and not in a way that can go back." James stood too, his expression a mixture of sadness and resignation. "I don't want this, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt you. I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But sometimes love isn't enough to fix what's broken. We're both so lost. We're holding on to something that's already gone." The tears finally spilled over, and she turned away, not wanting him to see the full extent of her heartache. They stood there in silence, two people who had once been each other's everything but were now strangers in the same home. Later that day, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she signed the papers. The ink seemed to blur as she traced her name, a symbol of the end of a chapter she had never expected to close. She looked at the space where James had always sat, and it felt like an eternity had passed since they had shared a meal there, laughing, talking about their future. The sound of a door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. James stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes reflecting the same pain she felt. For a moment, it was as if nothing had changed, as if they could reach out to each other and fix everything. But when he stepped forward, the distance between them only seemed to grow. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "For everything." She nodded, her heart aching for the man she had once loved with all her heart. "I'm sorry too." They stood there, in the echo of their past, knowing that their paths would never cross in the same way again. The love they had once shared, the dreams they had once built together, had slowly crumbled into dust. And now, all they had left were the memories of what could have been. As Sarah left the house, the door closing softly behind her, she felt a sense of finality. It wasn't just the end of their marriage, it was the end of an era of her life. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope. Sometimes, letting go was the only way to find yourself again. This story reflects the painful and often bittersweet reality of divorce. It explores the emotional journey of two people who once loved each other deeply but ultimately realized that their paths had diverged beyond repair.